everyone. Thank you again for joining us on the Servant Podcast this month of January. We appreciate your participation with us on these studies. And here on the show, I've got David Jones again with me. And we apologize that we couldn't release on our regular Tuesday date, but we're here for you now, and we appreciate your patience with us. On the show today, we've been talking about motivation to grow, especially in Christianity. You know, everybody needs motivation to grow. And today we're going to be discussing how we maintain Christian values, because in the world today, there are a lot of values, expressed in a lot of different ways. You have maybe a naturalistic values that are expressed. Maybe there's a more conservative values that are expressed, or a more liberal-minded value that is expressed. But what about biblical values? What about what Jesus says, Christian values? How can we have those, and how can we maintain those in our walk with Christ? So that's what we're going to be discussing today on the show. When we think about maintenance and maintaining something, maintenance is needed, on a lot of things in life. And sometimes it can be something drastic that it needs maybe renovations, or maybe it's something small. Maybe it's something very minute that just needs a quick fix. Maintenance is definitely needed. Think about in a house, David. I mean, over the years you've owned various properties where you've lived. How often have you had to maintain those properties or build them up that way they don't run into the ground?
Well, constantly you have to be on the watch for a leak here or a tear there, something wearing out. Like, anything that's made will eventually wear out. So you have to maintain it. You have to check your plumbing. You have to check your electrical stuff. You have to, from time to time, you have to paint. You have to sometimes re-roof a house, take the shingles off. Even sometimes if it's not brick on the outside, you have to paint it, because the weather will eventually wear it away. And so everything you do, you have to maintain. If you don't maintain it, it takes you way more when you get ready to fix it. And sometimes you can't fix it if you don't maintain it. It'll rot away, and you have to redo it. Instead of just taking care of it, you take care of it as you go along. And Christianity is exactly the same way. Sometimes people get out here and they may be just start missing a service or two because their values, their heart's on something else. And then they quit studying a little bit, and they quit doing this a little bit, and then 2 or 3 or 4 years later, they're not even attending. And you go talk to them and you say, "What happened?" And they'll honestly tell you, "I don't really know."
Yeah.
The problem was they didn't maintain it on a daily basis. They didn't keep after it every day, keeping their focus on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It reminded me, you were talking about painting a house. The reason we paint rooms is because they start to fade. They start to get ugly. They might get marks on them or blemishes. And it reminded me, your son-in-law, Dan Cates, I know he likes this song. It's "Let the Beauty of Jesus Be Seen in Me." Sometimes we can fade. Sometimes we can get blemishes. Sometimes we, through over time in our walk with Christ, maybe we're not as on fire. Maybe we don't look as good. And not in the aspect of looking good just to look good, but when God looks at us as a faithful child of His, maybe we've got more blemishes than what we started with. And that's the reason that we need to look at ourselves and examine ourselves, Paul says in 2 Corinthians 13:5, and we need to test ourselves. Whether we are in the faith, we need to continue to add to our faith. So that's very important for us to maintain those things. That way we don't get discouraged along the way. And as you were talking about, that way we don't, 3 years from now, we haven't given up.
Yes.
And then we don't have a reason as to why we gave up in the first place.
So, and sometimes those things are our fault because we don't maintain them. But sometimes we're thrown a surprise. After our trailer burned a number of years ago, we tried to buy our first house, and it had mostly brick, but it did have some siding on it. Under the carport, it had siding. So I had painted the house, and I had it nice looking and all. And our little girl was 4.5 years old, and she was learning to write. And so she took a purple color, and she went out there on a paling her height, and she made, her name is, we call her Shelly. Her name is Michelle. We call her Shelly. She made S's with that purple color all the way out under the carport. And I started trying to cover that back over. And I went and bought 2 or 3 gallons of the best paint I could buy. And every time I put it over it, it would bleed through. And I don't know how many times I painted. And when we moved in that house, it still had a faint line of S's all the way down, because I was surprised. I mean, something came up on me that I wasn't prepared for. Yeah. And I could not get it back like it used to be. So we have to be careful. And then sometimes the world's going to throw us a curve, and we have to deal with it best we can.
Yeah. Well,
but if we're not maintaining it along the way, if I had not been painting that house and kept it up, it would have been way worse than that.
Right. The volume, it made me think of the word volume. You said you bought gallons of the best paint.
That's right.
The amount. So think about this. As we're walking with Christ, as we're traveling through this world, and we're cognizant that this world is not our home, and we have this thought, I'm trying to be better than what I was. It doesn't matter how hard we try. It seems that sometimes our old man tries to come back. And even though the volume of Christianity that we place upon ourselves, maybe some of those old traits or old habits tend to come back through, and they can bleed through at times.
That's right. So, you couldn't see the S's from the road, and you couldn't even see the S's in the driveway. But when you got right up on it, you could see a line. You could see the S's behind there. And that's what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. We sometimes we get scars in life, and they may never go 100% away. Yeah. But we know they've been covered by, if we're covered by the blood, we know they've been covered. But every now and then, that old man might try to come back through there.
Sure.
But we got to maintain it, even to keep him down.
Yeah, and it's becoming really what it is. It's becoming a sacrifice. There in Luke, in chapter 9, verse 23, it says, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he's saying, if anyone wants to come to me. Now, remember, previously, he invited anyone to come to him. In Matthew 11, starting in about verse 28, he says, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and what will you find? Rest. Jesus will supply that rest. But then he tells them there in our text in Luke 9, he says, if you wish to come after me, there are some things that you have to do. You have to deny yourself and take up your cross daily and follow me. So it's a daily thing. It's a daily maintenance upon our own souls. And that's what we have to do. We have to look at ourselves and try our best. Today is for God. Tomorrow's for God. And I tend to find that it's best if we focus on today. We can set goals for the future, but if we think to ourselves, if maybe we're trying to quit a habit or start a new habit, me personally, I think the worst thing to do is count days. I'm 5 days clean. Well, or 10 days clean of whatever. Maybe I'm trying to quit smoking. I've been no smoking for a week. How about we just focus on no smoking for today?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. It's like, this is January the 18th. We're making this podcast. So you're 18 days into the new year. I have an idea that most people's New Year's resolutions have probably faded by the wayside. Maybe we had a resolution we were going to lose a little weight. Well, and so the first 3 or 4 or 5 days, just like you said, 4 or 5 days, we pushed ourselves to walk, and we pushed ourselves to eat healthy. And we said, man, I'm 4 or 5 days into this thing. And then we start thinking, I got 360 more to go. And so I can't make it 360 more days. I can't do this 360 days. But what can you do? I can do it today, because I may not have 360 days, but I've got today. So what am I doing with today? If I want to be there 365 days down the road, it starts today. And that's Christianity. If I want to follow the Lord, then I'm going to have to make that decision on a daily, not on a daily basis, but understand that it's a daily commitment. I made that decision to follow him. Now, what do I have to do? I have to deny myself. When? Every day. So when I wake up, I'm denying myself that day. When I wake up, I'm denying myself that day. And if I live 3 days, I'll make it 3 days. If I live 4 days, I'll make it 4 days. But if I look either where I've been or where I'm 100% I'm thinking I can't get there, then I can't do it. What am I doing today? So, people say sometimes, man, if I had $1 million, here's what I do. I say, what are you doing with the $100 you got now? Because that's what you'd be doing with $1 million.
Yep.
So it's the same thing. In that context, Jesus has told them that he's going to die, and he knew his death was going to be crucifixion. So then he says to them, you're going to have to crucify yourself on a daily basis. I'm going to be crucified. I'm going to be raised up the third day. And if you want to come where I am, if you want to follow me, you're going to have to take up your cross on a daily basis and follow me. That is, deny yourself. I'm going to have to deny myself. I'm going to the garden. I'm going to pray 3 times that God takes it away, but nevertheless, I'm going to do his will. You're going to see that. Okay. When you see that, you're going to have to do the same thing every day. You're going to have to say, whatever God's will is, that's what I'm going to do. And if I do that on a daily basis, I start today and do it 10 years down the road, I'm just 10 years better off than I was because I did it on a daily basis. I had to maintain that goal every day, and I had to set that value to do it.
Yeah. And so we have to be careful, going back to what you're saying about, it's the 18th. I've got 300 some more days to try to do my best. Well, there's an intimidation factor to that.
Sure.
If we think about the intimidation, we're liable to quit. And I think we can tie that into our walk with Christ as well, because if we look at what Christ said, there's an intimidation factor to that. Are you telling me I've got to be faithful for 70, 80, however many more years we have life? That's an intimidation factor. But we can't let that hinder our growth today.
That's right.
Because if we look at Jesus, we look how perfect, and we're going to be talking about this here in an episode or two, the perfect moral qualities of Christ, and every quality of Jesus was perfect. If we look at Jesus as a whole and we list out every characteristic and we think, Jesus was just absolutely perfect. Yeah, that can intimidate us. We can think there's no way I'm going to ever measure up to this. And that's true. We will never measure up perfectly to the image of Christ, but it's a daily thing. How about we think about who our master is? We need to set our sights on who our master is. There, going back to Matthew 11, right around verse 30, he says that he is gentle and lowly in heart. He's gentle. He's understanding of our state. Hebrews 4:15 and 16 says. So he's not going to be unreasonable for us. So we can't intimidate ourselves off of the perfect character of Christ. We need to look at it with an open heart, saying, how about today I focus on patience? How about today I focus on submission? How about today I focus on love? And then if it's a constant, how about we set out every week? Here's a challenge for each of us, myself included. How about we set out every week for a whole month, looking at a different aspect of Christianity, a different value, if you will. Maybe love is one, patience is one, temperance, self-control. And we assign a value each and every day. Maybe Sundays are always love. Mondays are always patience. And we do that every day for a whole month. By the end of the month, we don't have to remind ourselves, I need to be more patient.
That's right. I've already started maintaining. Well, it's exactly what Peter said, Josh, in 2 Peter 1, when he talked to them about they had received a faith of the same kind as theirs, like precious faith. In chapter 1 and verse 3 of 2 Peter, he says, seeing that his divine power has granted to us everything pertaining to life and godliness through the true knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and excellence. For by these, that is, the things that pertain to life and godliness, he's granted us his precious and magnificent promises, so that by them you may become partakers, of the divine nature. When you're baptized, you don't become divine, but you are put in a position where you might become partakers. And here's how you do it in verse 5. Now, for this very reason, applying all diligence, in your faith supply moral excellence. He's going to start listing the things that you have to add to your life in order to be what we're supposed to be. So you just what you said, moral excellence. And then when you have moral excellence, that's courage, that's virtue. You have knowledge. You put the things that God said in the promises into action with your courage, and you learn wisdom. That's what the idea of knowledge there is, wisdom. And then he says, and to that wisdom, then you're going to add self-control. Once you learn and control yourself, now you're going to be more patient. And then you're going to persevere. You're going to be stronger. And when you become stronger, and you're acting like God, so you're adding godliness. And then you're going to if you add godliness to your life, you're going to care about everybody else. So you're going to have brotherly kindness. And when you have all of those things, you're going to eventually make it to agape love, the kind of love that Christ and God had for us, and God sending his son and his son coming and dying for us. But it's interesting that back here in verse 5, applying all diligence, adding to is the Greek idea there. And it's epikorigeo. It's a Greek term, epi above, korigeo, course. So you're looking at your life, and you are the conductor of your life, and you're supposed to add and a conductor, when a conductor at a symphony, he'll have his hand doing this, and he'll bring in this over here, and he'll bring in this over there, and he'll bring in this instrument, he'll bring in that instrument. And when he brings them all in together, you have a perfect sounding symphony. It's interesting that there are 8 notes in an octave in music, and there are 8 things that Peter lists here. I don't know if that's coincidental or if that's actually by design. But he's saying, David, you are the director of your life. So you add this, and you add this, and you add this. And when you add them all together, now you're in perfect harmony with God. And you can maintain that by making sure those things are adding. And he says, adding with all diligence, not haphazardly, but on a daily basis, like we're talking about, making a diligent effort every day to be sure we're adding these things to our lives.
And if you go back to verse 4, at the end of verse 4, it says, talking about that we can become partakers of the divine nature. In 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 15 and 16, God is he's telling us, it's his plea to us, and it's a reference from the Old Testament, but it applies to us. He says, "Be ye holy as I am holy," says the Lord. And here we have the image of what we need to add to our life. We need to be holy as God, and we can become partakers of his divine nature if we continue to add to our faith as we walk. Going along with that, we have to subtract things. And we talked about this on a previous episode. We have to take some things, some bad habits out of our life. I was listening to, I can't remember his name. He was a doctor of psychology. He was talking about, the best way to stop bad habits is not, maybe, for example, maybe I have a arrogance problem. There's an aspect to me sitting and sulking over my arrogance and saying, I'm just so arrogant, I can't do it. But then his approach to it was, how about you recognize or start to recognize the very act of arrogance in your life? Okay, say I'm being arrogant. I need to recognize that then and there and mentally, prepare myself and say, Josh, you're being arrogant right now. That's the only way I'm going to solve that problem, is recognize and recognize I need to change from that.
If your car is not running right, you carry it to a mechanic. And before he can fix the problem, he has to recognize what's causing the problem. And that's what you're talking about. We have to take the word of God and we have to apply it to my life and find out why I'm being like I am. And back to what I said, I failed to carry that out real quickly. Divine nature doesn't mean we become divine, but it means we take on the character of God. We learn how to be like God. But here's how God said you can be like me. Here's that divine nature. And I'm not going to ever be deity, but I can be like God because I add these things to my life.
Right. And that's key. We just have to look at what God says for us, who God is, why we should commit to him daily and take our cross. What's your why? Maybe you're a Christian. Maybe you have tried to maintain your Christian values. Maybe you forfeited that. Maybe we need to get back on track. We're here to help you. And there are many people that want to help you. feel free to reach out. But we have to understand our why. We need to understand that God is who he is. He loves us. He sent his son to die for us, and we can become perfected. We can become partakers of his divine nature if we continue to add to our faith. Thank you for joining us on the Servant Podcast. We appreciate your attention and your participation in this study. Please reach out if we can do anything to help. Join us again next week.